What's shaking, cats and kittens? I'm Rob Lee from Getting to the Truth in This Art. And this podcast is brought to you by our presenting sponsor, Bazaar. Bazaar is a gift shop for those seeking the strange and unusual. Got morbid curiosity? Got an interest in natural history? Bazaar's got you covered. Bazaar specializes in antique medical equipment, jewelry, prints, funerary antiques, and many other morbid gifts. The inventory is ever-changing. I'm wearing a great death's head moth pin, and I'm enjoying this hand-poured candle called Overgrown Cemetery. It's great. It has the studio smelling awesome. Head on over to 3534 Chestnut Avenue in Baltimore. It's in that Hamden neighborhood, and see what they got to offer at Bazaar. Tell them Rob Lee sent you. Takeout is cool, but delivery gets pricey. So, like a phoenix from the ashes, indoor dining is back at Forge Eatery. I use the analogy because the food is fire. It's a new approach to farm to table. No overalls, just dope food. Try my favorites, like the mushroom stew with pine nuts and ricotta, the cornmeal fried happy oysters, and the seared duck breast. Also, ask about the chocolate chip cookie tins. Mini chocolate chip cookies with a dusting of sea salt. Simply delicious. Head on over to forgedeatery.com to check out the current menu options and make a reservation today. Forged is located at 3520 Chestnut Avenue in Hamden. Welcome to Getting to the Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee, and my next guest is a reporter living in Baltimore and was previously the editor-in-chief of the Baltimore City paper, a contributing writer to Spin. His work has appeared in New York Times, Vice, The Village Voice, and many other publications. He's a co-author with Baynard Woods of I Got a Monster, The Rise and Fall of America's Most Corrupt Police Squad. We have Brandon Soderberg. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
I was trying to do like a Tonight Show intro, and I was like, there are a lot more words here than I realized. So I gave, and I always try to give that 1,000-foot view. But firstly, how are you? And secondly, getting into that spiel about your work and what your background is.
I'm doing great. You know, I feel like we're sort of heading out of the pandemic, at least as we're recording this. So that's nice to know. I think we're going to be back to something resembling normalcy, and hopefully we learned a lot. But I'm feeling pretty good. Yeah, it's the weather's getting nicer. I'm excited.
And I see the bike in the background, so definitely that's the thing. Going out there and kind of being able to be out there, and when there's people around and you're riding, you're able to see more things, see more people, and I'm obviously looking at the road, but it's a different wave, it's a different environment when you're out there.
Yeah, and for me, it's central to how I do my work. Is like I like the way I find stories, the way I understand the city, is through walking, biking, and taking the bus everywhere and trying to learn. So like the idea of that, sort of having that both as just like, it'll be nice to be out in the city that I love, but also like back to these sort of crucial tools for how I try to do my work, or just to sort of be and exist in the city, and feeling like I can do that again because we're coming out of this is really nice. And yeah, it's been a very odd year or so doing reporting, because like I'm so focused on like scenes and characters, and like you lose a lot of that as a reporter if you're mostly just on Zoom. You know what I mean? Like I don't have like, it's so great to interview someone for a story while they're doing something or while they're doing their work, and to not have that, it can make your stories a little drier. So I'm really happy to sort of, and just like get a little more energy in the reporting and the work I'm doing as well.
Yeah, I when you describe that, I immediately thought of like SVU when they're like looking at someone while they're doing their job, and it's like he's not going to put that rug down. He's going to keep doing that rug. He's going to keep doing his work. So in the last, let's see, I feel like I've had a dark shroud over me, but in the last like 15 hours, I did the whole ebook. I listened to the book. First off, I dig the book.
Awesome.
And it felt almost like a trip down memory lane because it's like within the last 5 to 6 years and is in Baltimore. It plays, and we talked a little bit before we started that you wanted it to play like a movie and with these asides, but also to me, it felt like a limited series. It felt like this works in this way. It's like it would be really fire if it was a limited series. And I learned one thing from it, amongst many things, but I learned one thing that really sticks out. somehow neglecting to wear your seatbelt turns into gun charges. I don't know if I read the most recent handbook, but police handbook, but that's the thing. That's a key thing I took away from this.
Yeah. I mean, I really appreciate you saying that. Like, yeah, we really wanted the book to kind of feel, like I said, a movie or like a mini series, like something that kind of moves a little faster than your average book, or maybe closer to a novel. To be clear, everything in the book is reported and true, but we wanted to kind of have that energy of like a series or a movie. And yeah, I mean, something that has really become, I've always cared about, become kind of an obsession. The book is dedicated to defense attorneys fighting for the Fourth Amendment, which is our reasonable right to search and seizure. What you really see in the book, and what I've really seen talking to literally dozens and dozens of people that have been victimized by these cops and this police, is like these sort of excuses that cops will use to get in your car, in your pockets, or in your house. And chief among them is things that can't be really proven, especially couldn't be proven or disproven a few years ago before body cameras, which is, you want to stop someone, just say they weren't wearing a seatbelt. They can say all they want, they were wearing a seatbelt. Another great one is I smelled marijuana. Cops love to lie about smelling weed. That's another one, because there's really no way to disprove that. And like, I've seen trials where even the stop was based on, I smelled marijuana. Then they search the car, find no weed, but they find a gun or some other drugs. And the jury isn't really instructed. The judge and the prosecutors never say, so this was the pretense for the stop was that you smelled weed, but you actually didn't find any weed. So where was the weed you smelled? There's one example in the book that's really amazing, which is one of the cops claimed in court that he could smell marijuana from across by the incinerator across the highway with all the windows up. And then the way that became like kind of disproven in court, which is kind of fascinating, was that the defense attorney sort of pulled out the weed that was found, because they did find weed in this case, and like asked the jury, like, can you smell this? It's 10 feet from you. And they're like, not really. So the idea that they could smell it across 4 lanes of traffic, all the windows up by the incinerator, is just a lie. Hopefully, as we've been moving away a little bit from regulating criminalizing cannabis, which is great. But yeah, that's another. Not wearing a seatbelt. Your windows were tinted, because of course they can stop you and say, we thought your windows were past the legal limit. Then they go, oh, well, we were wrong anyway. We're still going to search your car. I mean, these things are crucial to, there's the big crazy stuff in the book, cocaine's dealing and all these things. But the sort of day-to-day running up on people and searching them illegally is like the bread and butter of the Baltimore Police Department's criminality, really. And
one of the things I got out of it, just that kind of enabled things, was just this weird data-driven approach. It's like the data says this, you're getting these results, so Vic Mackey it up. I don't care. Keep doing your thing. And that is like, because I'm a data analyst by day, so it's just like, that's not how you use that. It's like, drill down. What are these extra steps here? How are we getting here? Well, a gun is off the street. That's all that matters. And that's really all you have to produce under these circumstances. You can skirt the system and abuse and take advantage of that shit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the real thing is like these numbers to put in front of the city, to put in front of the mayor, to put on the news and say, hey, we seized this many guns. And if you don't think about it hard, and I don't want to come off as like someone who knows everything, so a lot of what I know I learned from the book. So I always try hard not to be too much of a lecturer on this stuff, but like you really start to think about it more and you start to realize, wait, like, yeah, these idea that just getting guns by any means necessary is going to sort of reduce crime, because you have this basic idea that's like, okay, well, if one less gun is on the street, therefore one less chance of someone being shot. But what I think the book shows, without kind of saying it too loud, because the book tries not to be too sort of preachy. I think especially because my politics and Boehner's politics are pretty clearly what they are. We really want to make sure the book wasn't just us sort of saying like, exactly. Yeah. And it's just an incredible story that really involves a lot of people whose lives were really affected. And so kind of carrying that story to sort of, project my own politics in it, we didn't want to do. But I would say that the data-driven thing really crumbles, because what you really see, especially with these cops, was that they were sort of running up on anybody they saw. Mm-hmm. Really, I shouldn't say anybody, young black men almost exclusively. Young black men sitting on a bench, hanging out, sitting on a stoop, waiting for the bus, sort of in a so-called high crime neighborhood, which is also racist in its entire construction. Yeah. And they go after these people. They roll up on them in unmarked cars. So, in vests, if a Chevy Malibu pulled up on a corner where I was, and I would run too, then they use the run as the reason to search them because that's somehow suspicious behavior. And then what you start to really see, or I started to see, I should say, is that this sort of chaos that they create adds to crime. It adds to crime in the fact that they're if you let's say you are someone that was chased down and you did have, say, drugs on you, they steal those drugs. Generally, that's what they were doing. So then you have to go to someone and say your plug or whatever and be like, so these cops took all my drugs, and the guy's going to be like, oh, okay, so you got arrested? And we're like, no. It's like, okay, so the cops came and took all your drugs, but you didn't get arrested. And there's an example in the book that I don't think is too much of a spoiler of a man who was robbed for $10,000 who couldn't pay a drug debt as a result and was murdered. And so you have this direct connection between these cops not only not really stopping that much crime, because also what they would do was when they got a gun, they would just stop working for the day. So if they got a gun 45 minutes into their day, they were just like taking the rest of the day off.
Yeah, it's like, I've got my quota. We're all set here. And the thing that gets me, again, going back to the data, it's just when it's this book, Weapons of Math Destruction, is kind of one of these things where you're using that to give credence to racial profiling and just racially driven police work in a city that's had a rich history of that type of bullshit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if there's a book that I've really been obsessed with over the past few months called Locking Up Our Own by James Foreman Jr., a Black lawyer and former teacher who writes about DC and traces the sort of obsession with gun violence, and saying the fix to gun violence is to seize more guns, and also with drugs before the drug war sort of is starting to somewhat taper off. He makes a really compelling argument for how we've really fueled a whole another level of mass incarceration through how we're policing people by the idea that because they have guns, we need to do whatever we want and get them off the street. It doesn't matter if it's legal or illegal. It's a really amazing book that's I'm really sort of just prognosticating about all the time, but it really kind of blew my mind. And I'm actually, there's a story I've been working on for a while that by the time this is out will probably be out about Washington DC's gun recovery unit, which operates really similar to Baltimore's gun trace task force. And in DC, in DC has some of the most strict gun control laws in this whole country. That strictness allows their police to be even more sort of aggressive and shady about approaching people. And in some of the wards in DC, majority Black wards, there is this kind of premise that they walk up to you and ask, "You got a gun on you?" Of course, again, when I say people, they really mean young Black men, almost exclusively. They ask someone that question, "Got a gun on you?" which is a crazy thing to ask someone off the street. Yeah. If you're walking down the street, you immediately are going to assume you're going to answer the cop, even though they've asked you a question. So it's really a consent search. You can just say no, but no one says no to the police. So then you say, "No, I don't have a gun." And then they go, "When Mr. Soderberg," I also should say, of course, as a white male, especially, I will never encounter this kind of police harassment. But I'll use myself as an example. "Mr. Soderberg, he was evasive when we asked him if he had a gun. He didn't look at us. He walked backwards." Then they use how you answer the question they ask you to search you for a gun. So it's a really big problem with policing, and I think we really have to start thinking about it. And the Gun Trace Task Force is sort of the logical extension of this kind of guns, an idea that sounds good that and I've sort of written some other pieces about this, but really goes south and really makes a war on guns that operates a lot like the war on drugs and repeats all the same problems of that, and really ends up arresting and incarcerating the very same people as the war on drugs.
And that's the thing that I wanted to touch on before we move to this next question. I think some of these things, whether it be the rebranding, I feel like ultimately what's the goal here? Is it to get more of a certain demographic, Black males or what have you, in jail? Sure. And I think it's this rebranding and it's nuanced because it's been done for so long that it's we have to do the burden of proof to prove that racism exists. It's no, they've been doing it for so long that it's just, it's like,
it's almost like when Bruce Lee is like, your style is not to have a style. It's almost that to me. It's just like, oh yeah, I just slipped that punch. I'm in the Matrix. I'm in the racial Matrix. That's what's happening. And it's no different. But I think kind of what we're seeing as we're recording this with what's the victimization of like the Asian community. I think get rid of the bullshit hashtags and all of that stuff, because it's confusing more people than anything else. Call it what it is. This is racism. This is urban terrorism. This is domestic terrorism. It's these different things, but don't try to come up with something catchy and all of that different stuff. So the same as what these things have been. You're targeting Black people. You're targeting Black males. It's racism baked into the system. And the thing I literally fist bumped when the part about like, yeah, we have like federal documentation that shows that there's just racism baked into the policing in Baltimore. And I was like, yes. And someone looked at me like, what are you doing? I was like, listen to your book.
That's so cool. I mean, the best thing about writing a book is like hearing how people experience it, because it's not the same as an article or even a long like sort of cover kind of feature. It's like something that, I mean, you could read the book in probably 4 or 5 hours if you felt like it, but hearing people respond is awesome. And like, yeah, that's exactly, I mean, like the Department of Justice said like the Baltimore Police Department is through and through a racist organization. Police is in a racist way. And like, you can't, and it's also this thing that to shout out kind of another sort of more academic book is Alex Vital's End of Policing, which is another great book. And he really thinks a lot about data and also quote unquote gang databases. Another example of how like there's all this sort of data gathering that to show things that are really obvious. Mm-hmm. Like you don't need more data. You don't need more data on stop and frisk to show that stop and frisk is racist in its construction. Like, and this allows them to perpetuate it. Well, we're doing a study on it, or, we're thinking about this, or like, and another thing it's a little bit alluded to in the book. But it's kind of, if you understand the long history of Baltimore policing, is like this sort of rebranding also of these kind of police units. So they get in trouble.
Yeah. Different name.
Yeah. Like, the Violent Crimes Impact Division. It comes some kind of controversy. It becomes the Violent Crimes Impact Section. There's a thing in the book that like, when you begin the book, you're with the first chapter, primarily you're with 4 of the officers when they were working separately from the other ones before they all came together. They were in a unit called the Special Enforcement Section. Then they all get moved over to the Gun Trace Task Force. It's like these names become another sort of, you said, like branding issue. It's really, and just to sort of, I've been really deep in this, currently in Washington, D.C., there's a lot of Black Lives Matter DC, especially in Stop Police Terror DC, have been really attacking in a really powerful way this gun recovery unit in DC. And I've been speaking to the Metropolitan Police Department as I write this story. Yeah. And their response to me most recently, which made me just like, I laughed so hard, like my girlfriend was like, didn't know what's going on. And it's because they sent me a scene where like, well, we've moved on and, we have a new unit. It's called the Violence Reduction Unit. You're like, come on, like, gun recovery unit, they're bad, but the violence reduction unit, the VRU, is going to be so different than the GRU. It's just like, it's a scam. And it's like this way of perpetuating these ideas in ways that sort of dodge. And then the frustrating thing about it is like, then a lot of the news, especially sort of your TV news and your daily news, will sort of follow these stories and be like, big changes in the police department. They're renaming all their things. Come on. Like we should not keep falling for this. We have in 2017, we created a thing in Baltimore called the District Action Team, DAT, which is just another unit doing the same thing. Yeah. Just recently, just an example, the DAT was created to sort of ideally, in theory, like police to reduce homicides, which I don't believe that police actually have any ability to reduce homicides, really, short of homicide detectives solving homicides. Yeah. But there's a recent, over Easter, there was a big kind of block party, and the police broke it up, because that's what they do when Black people try to have fun, is they come and interrupt it. Anyway, the people that were sort of breaking up this Easter block party were District Action Team people. And I would remember I tweeted this. I was like, wait, we created this unit in 2017 to stop violence, and now we're using it to break up block parties, like people having fun on the holiday. And then I think that feeds into some of the conversation we've been having about abolishing police, defunding the police. It's like you create these units, you tell us that we need them and this is why you need them. And then before you know it, you find out that they're like, arresting 17-year-olds at a block party. They're not even doing what they're intended to do. It's a mess.
It's almost like you want to be like what I do in the other podcasts. Everything is a bit to me. It's like I could try to find humor in everything because sometimes it's just ridiculous. And it's just like the unit formerly known as. That's what I feel like happens here. And it's just wild. And I look at stuff and I just see stuff and I'm like, that's not normal. Or things will just happen, and I notice a certain date because one of the podcasts that I was doing was Metrocast, and we did that for like 3 years, but up until Trump got in, and I started writing this into a script. We literally finished an episode when the initial news about Freddie Gray came over. So we were just wrapping one up, and in this sense of being desensitized to things, it's like, oh, that happens here all the time,
right?
This type of thing, and then it becoming a bit of a segment of like updates as to what's happening here, and lines were being drawn. We were part of a bigger podcast network, and that's when I got on I was waving my Baltimore flag. I was like, how dare you? Because people were taking shots. And I was like, you don't know what it is here. You don't know anything about this place. So, shut your trap.
Yeah.
So let's see. I want to ask this one real quick because I like to get this insight. What is it like covering a city that has this reputation of being as dangerous and covering stories that are more on the darker side? Because I saw that you had the hip hop work that you were doing earlier. You were covering like pop culture and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But as far as like covering like the crime and some of the stories that are here, how has that been for you?
So really briefly, I started as mostly writing kind of music criticism and essays and things like that, and kind of connecting them to politics and race. And what I really started to see as I was interested in that was clearly the constant interruption in the world of hip hop by the police and by law enforcement, again, for racist reasons. I mean, one of the earliest examples that kind of moved me was I wrote about back in 2011, rapper Lil Boozy was incarcerated and was being charged with a murder that it seemed pretty clear he didn't have much to do with. They were using his lyrics and these things to suggest he was this violent person. And I spoke to his family a little bit for that story. And so just kind of getting into that, I started to see that side of it. I was always kind of interested in it. And another example of that for me is like, I was both always been interested in Baltimore club music and I've gone to club shows most of my life. And you sometimes see those being broken up by cops and things like that. So I sort of saw this intersection between art and policing, racist policing already. And, you get this classic thing that I think we've all experienced at this point, more of just like, you would read about a police raid of a club or something. You're like, I was there. This is not what happened, So anyway, and so that's sort of like, I think without exactly realizing it, prepped me for it. So I was always interested in sort of the deeper stories there. And then into 2014, I became a staff member at Baltimore City paper and started covering protests. This was like, they were really important. I mean, there were some really powerful protests in Baltimore surrounding the Michael Brown's death and things like that. And so I was covering that. I was sort of seeing the same thing. Like, I was at that protest last night, and the police version of that is not the real version. And that kind of kept moving. And so I started to it was sort of a strange but easy transition. And then I found that like, what I always liked about writing about music or anything was the people. And there was the same kind of entryway into these stories if they're kind of people-focused stories. Even if sometimes these people were people that were really tragically harmed or hurt by police or families damaged, it still was like about learning about people. In terms of, the sort of navigating it, I mean, I think again, like certainly I don't feel particularly afraid of anyone other than cops. Like those are the only people I've ever been messed with in doing my reporting or harassed by. I think if anything, what's been really helpful for me is like, I sort of feel like you get a deeper and more profound sense of how violence and things like that operate in the city by covering it. And in some ways, even though I guess it's really up to the reporter, but for me, it made me better understand it, which at least, and see the sort of complexity of it. And so that for me is like, move me away from, like, I guess maybe some people cover the city and cover crime, and that makes them more scared of the city. If anything, it's made me understand it more and see where that violence is happening. And then I think that, like, then I sort of have to deflect these conversations I would have at a bar or whatever. What do you do? I'm a reporter. What do you cover? I cover police and drugs and guns in Baltimore. Oh, Baltimore. And they're like, oh, all right. So I've sort of equipped myself with enough knowledge and awareness of that to sort of push against it. And I also think my background, like, I'm from Baltimore. My family's from Baltimore. I was raised in a family that did not trust the police. I was taught to not believe like the police. So I sort of maybe had a head up there. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's just like a way of better understanding it and then hopefully conveying that to other people. I think that with the book, I think that hopefully you get even though it's a really messed up story, I hope you get some degree of a feel for the complexity of the city. And I hope through the portraits of the people in the book that are victimized by the task force, some of who are people that a lot of people wouldn't necessarily want to have a lot of sympathy for because they think of drug dealers and things like that as bad. That you really see where you sort of see the complexity of even the drug trade that, in the book, I hope.
And I like the way it's described in it. It's not like, oh, this person that's buying drugs. It's like, no, this customer, or because that's ultimately what it is. And, a lot of times when they have these conversations around numbers and all of this different stuff. And I remember it was one night I was going to see Shaolin Jazz, and it was a Ravens playoff game against the Titans, the one that they lost. And I had a leather kimono on. It's getting weirder. And I was going to Creative Alliance, and I was just like pissed going there because I'd watched this whole state of Baltimore, people just trying to lobby for who's going to be the next mayor at the time. And I'm just losing my marbles because you just hear people just using stats to try to push this narrative of, pretty much be afraid of Baltimore. I'm the person that's going to fix it for you. It's like, yeah, okay. I don't think the people here are listening. And the thing that was wild about it is it's in this East Baltimore area where I live at. And I'm like, based on what you're saying, I should have been shot by now. Based on what you're saying, I should not see well-meaning white folks wearing flip-flops. It's like they should all be wearing track shoes. And it was like, I was like, stop putting this out there, because you turn these people into numbers. You turn the people of the city into numbers. And that's why you can have people get on the news and spouting off publicly, broadly. And like, I work in higher ed, and you see this data. It's like, I'm afraid to come to Baltimore. It's like, because you have people out there continuing this idea as opposed to getting to the root thing and humanizing individuals. And it's like, get to the root thing of why is this happening? When I hear a story, I'm like, all right, what's the other piece of what's under this? I start analyzing it. Give me the 5 whys. Why did this happen? And keep going down and down and down, other than black people are violent. That's why this happened. Moving on. That's not how it works. And if you dig too deeper, and I approach most things in that manner of, I want to understand this better because I'm a human. I'm from the same part of town. Why are they doing it? And we have some overlap, but I don't do that same thing. There has to be something that's missing here. And I know it's missing. Where is it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have this, I think the homicide rate in this city is devastating, to be clear, but the sort of, the throwing around of this 300 plus number, I've always sort of had a problem with, because it's like, we've created this rubric in the city, and former police commissioners have told me this, that, 300 more homicides, if you're a police commissioner, is kind of the beginning of the end for you, or if you can't stem that. But then it becomes this implicit thing that maybe 285 or even 191 is okay. And that's sort of really fraught. And then at the same time, you have this idea that these are, this idea that crime is just happening everywhere. And you have this odd thing where the people that are kind of blathering the most about the violence, people that aren't in the city, or certainly aren't in the city very often, maybe for Ravens games and things like that, which is perfectly fine. But like those kind of people, again, I'm sort of thinking, especially of like sort of county white folks, or like dads in white sneakers from Shrewsbury, Pennsylvania, who come down or whatever. They're not going to be, the odds of them being affected by violence, even being sort of robbed, are pretty low. And they don't understand the sense that like where they are in the city is pretty far from that violence, and they don't understand how that violence has been sort of pushed to these parts of the city because of segregation and redlining, and that police differently in East and West Baltimore, where through segregation and redlining we've moved Black people to, like, all these things affect it. And so it's like this really like powerful and useful but really messed up political kind of football for a lot of people to sort of point to. It's like, look, if you're going to the Ravens games or you're going to Fells, like, you don't see and experience that violence. Like, you don't have any, you're not part of it. You don't see it, but you sort of use it, and you see that a lot. And that's really frustrating. I agree.
One of the things that catches me, and I want to get your take on like the creative scene here, because you've mentioned that you've been around the art scene and things like that. One of the things that gets me, I travel. Well, when we could travel, I would travel, and it was a few times I got some good insight when I was in New Orleans, and it's like, you don't sound like you're from here. What's up with your shoes? You might get robbed. And the dude just gave me the rundown. I was like, all right, good to know, these details, and you move a certain way. And other times I'll go to other places, and I'm just like, look, I want to get a lay of the land. I want to be around the real people. And I remember one of my buddies he's from Owings Mills, and he's like, yeah, I'm from Baltimore, to people that I was like, there is a clear delineation. I was like, we've walked around in Baltimore together. You avoid places that seem to be a little too Black or raucous. And he's a Black dude, but there's that county thing. So what is your take? What is your take on how, when people seem to use Baltimore for this attachment to Baltimore as a stamp of approval, while also throwing around, it's sketchy, or I want to leave here, and things like that. What is that? Because it feels like it's playing both for, like, hey, give me the stamp of approval. We're not about bullshit in Baltimore. But then there's that other side of, yeah, but I want to leave, and it's sketchy.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's I think that what you have is you have this sort of use of the city, and kind of relates to the previous question, the use of its sort of reputation as a tough place or a scary place or a violent place. And it is those things. It's obviously much more. It's sort of used to sort of give oneself some cred. Yeah. And then, but then it's also seen as like a stepping stone because you want to move to New York or even DC or things like that, which I can't really blame people for wanting to do that and expand their horizons. But the sort of coming through Baltimore and kind of rubbing the grittiness all over you or whatever to seem kind of cool is like a thing that happens on all levels. And it even happened. And what I think we're really, and I imagine this is true of most cities, but especially Baltimore, due to these things I'm talking about, like segregation. Like, I say I'm from Baltimore, and I kind of stress that. But if people start to talk to me, I try to really stress, like, look, I grew up in Highlandtown. I remember the Creative Alliance when I was at Patterson. As a kid, I think I saw Dick Tracy at the Patterson. I was like 6 years old. I really remember that vividly, with my grandparents. But okay, so that understanding of Baltimore for me is important, but maybe doesn't communicate to sort of an outsider, a foundation person, or trying to give you a grant. But it's really important to stress that, because like, I can't possibly see, an example is like, the great writer D. Watkins' friend. I think that he and I are from probably within a few, maybe even a few hundred or 1,000 feet of each other where we grew up. But his experience is radically different from me. And I can't possibly pretend that what I experienced as a white person in Baltimore and Highlandtown has a lot to do with that. And that kind of subtlety in theory would make you more of an expert or more of an authority on the city. I understand this, I understand the global thing, but instead there's sort of this Baltimore in the mind's eye, which is sort of this fusion of like crabs and quirky things, but also like The Wire or whatever. It's just like and I think that the best way to combat that is to be honest about it. I think this is a city that doesn't like outsiders, but which is pretty normal. Yeah. But I think the city really doesn't like is when people just don't present themselves honestly. And so like, I don't try to frame myself as a Baltimore writer. If someone asks where I'm from, I'm going to say that because like, I know that my experience is really different. And I think that kind of, and then I think also like, for me, I'd say that like I owe my career and my life to this city in so many ways, but it's really the affordability, the access to other cities that allowed me to have the career I did. Like when I started to write more, I could take a bus up to New York and like do an interview with like someone that's very, you know, a big deal and pitch that to the Village Voice or whatever. You know what I mean? Like that's because of the access to the city and also because of the affordability of the city. Like, you know, even until recently, I recently moved in with my girlfriend, but like I lived in a 1-bedroom studio that was $550. I lived in there until recently. 6 years. Like that was massively important to me being able to do the work I do. As I was saving that money, I wasn't sort of, you know, those things. And that's not true in a lot of other cities. So we should appreciate that, but sort of gain a smart perspective on it before we decide to move on to New York or DC or whatever. I had kind of an interesting experience too, because like I tried to do the whole like sort of New York writing thing. I just hated it so much. I really, from 2009, 2012, I was living in New Jersey and was working for Spin Magazine, coming to New York a lot. And I got sick of that and I moved back in 2013 and was like, I can do the same from Baltimore and enjoy myself a lot more.
That's kind of the vibe that in a spot that I'm in right now, because it's like, talking to different people, you get those different things. And it's like, all right, always about Baltimore. It's always about Baltimore for me. But at the same time, would I be able to do kind of balance the two? It's like, don't want to make that trip, not go anywhere crazy, but any place that I look at in terms of a possible relocation, one, it's always looked at as a short-term move. Two, it's like, what's similar to Baltimore? It's like New Orleans, Philadelphia, and that's about it for me. And because of that accessibility, because of the type of people that are there, and like I said, I'm looking for culture, and that's the thing. So let's see. I got 2 more questions. One of them is I said to you, the other one I did not. So what would you say your top 3 traits that you rely on as a writer?
That's a good question. That's fun. For me, it's like observation is first, which is just like, I really sort of practice the kind of reporting that I can't remember who originally said this, but kind of the art of hanging out. Like I'll spend a lot of time in a place or with someone for reporting because it's kind of everything. Like especially when I was covering protests, I just went to every protest, didn't always report it, but I got to know the people and the players, and they were like, there's that guy from City Paper. He's here again. And at least shows like I really care. I didn't just show up for 1 or 2. So observation is really important. The second one I would say is probably storytelling, which is I try to locate a narrative as much as I can. Obviously not all journalism demands that, but like I kind of look for a character or a sequence of events through which I can tell something that's really important, because I think that's how the story kind of feels more alive and kind of avoids the sort of problems and cliches of sort of daily news journalism that I really, really, really hate personally. Like I have a lot of contempt for the sort of daily news style of reporting. I don't understand. I don't know how useful it is. And so that's sort of like when you can find a person, I mean, really briefly, the book, I Got a Monster came together as a book that we knew would tell a story. We were able to identify that in a way, our main characters are the main cop, Wayne Jenkins, who was running the task force, and then this defense attorney, Ivan Bates, who was sort of going after him. And we didn't realize that at first. We didn't discover that until we gave a draft of about 75% of the book to some friends. And more than one was like, you got this kind of Ivan and Wayne going after each other thing, but you kind of didn't really build it up. And me and Baynard had to be like, oh, we didn't even realize we had that. Then we sort of went back and pushed that. So like, that's why I talk about as I mean by storytelling is like telling the story accurately and truthful for sure. But when you can locate people and figures and events through which it can move, that really makes the stuff sing. I think that's why it also might feel a little more sort of like a limited series or something. Yeah. So observation, storytelling. The last thing I'd say is style. That's also really important for me. I really think about how sentences are constructed, word, syntax and diction. I want the work to feel like the thing I'm describing. Readers can tell me if I could do that well or not. That's not for me to decide, but all right, I'll take it. But that's really important for me. And so like something, you see, I think in the book and some of my other more long form writing is this idea of like rhythm and like short sentences or long sentences. And like a long sentence might be a really long sentence that describes a lot of things. And that for me comes from like speaking to the person who experienced that. And when they were telling me that story, they were like, so I'm driving down the street and I'm throwing this cocaine out the window. And there's, you know what I mean? Like, you want that sort of stuff I want you to feel, I want you to be as immersed in the story as possible and feel it. And that comes through style. While also sort of being mindful of not, you don't want to push it too far or make it like sort of impenetrable. But that's sort of really important for me, is like observation in terms of like getting to know people and being there a lot. Storytelling, which is locating the sort of central narrative or central ideas through which, you kind of hang all the other information on, It's a story about whatever, policing or whatever, you want to have the people and the characters that can make it feel more real. And then style is a way to sort of enhance that. That's kind of like how I locate. And that doesn't always happen in stories. Sometimes stories are more conventional and straightforward, but like the things that I really focus on and care about, that's how I want them to feel. And that's what's really the structure for the book. So that's kind of my 3. And when I feel like I can do those 3 things, that's when I go forward with something too. Like if like, obviously there's stories that are important or something comes across and you write it real quick. But when I really decide this is going to be a book, which, was a big process, or this is going to be a cover story at City Paper, or this is going to be a long story I'm pitching to The Intercept or something. It's when those kind of 3 things, when I can do all those 3 things, that's when I'm going to move forward with it. If the story doesn't have those, that's sort of a way for the story itself, or the thing I think I'm interested in, to sort of be communicating to me that maybe you're not as interested in this, or maybe you haven't done enough work on it yet. Those are sort of, so they're kind of having, you're kind of ends up having this, the story kind of tells you if you're doing a good job or not,
Yeah, I mean, that's in a very, very hacky, low rent sort of way. That's the way I approach looking for stories I'm going to review for this game we call New Challenger. It's like, we do the whole Street Fighter thing for New Challenger, and it's the Street Fighter theme, and we go from story to story, and I give my my co-host, a keyword that's kind of innocuous, and it's like, all right, first of all, does this story make sense to me, and is it weird enough? And it's like, all right, this hits on this level. And that's kind of the approach. It has to hit on this level. It has to be weird. And it's just like, does this have legs? Can we get a solid like 3 to 5 minutes out of this and just breaking down and asking these questions? And is it kind of funny? Can we make this funny? And that's what I look for when I'm like filtering through all of this stuff, because week to week, you're going through and kind of, it's a lot of different news stories that are out there, and some of them are as covered and some of them are still developing and not finished. And it's like, or how many questions do I have about this particular thing? So yeah, that's I think having like a few different things as to why I'm going to move forward with this is key. And I think I'm going to try that approach. I think I'm going to try your approach a little bit. Yeah,
because I mean, you said funny. Like for me, another thing that, man, cheating, giving you a 4th one, but
it's
like
fine.
I do think about like, is this let's say compelling or entertaining? Because certainly, like I hope that people get a lot out of reading our book, and I hope they enjoy it. I know it's a really intense and messed up story, but it's very important for me that it's also like, I mean, one of the things Boehner and I really talked about was like, sometimes the sort of fancy world of journalism has this understanding that if a story is important, it means that it doesn't have to be interesting or entertaining, because it's just important, and like and sometimes you'll see like the more sort of important a story is, the less sort of well written it is, because I feel like so like trying to think of ways like it's really important to us that it like feels entertaining or compelling as well, and that ties to storytelling, character, and all these things as well. But that's really important too, that like, will people sort of, I think it's why there's been such an explosion of podcasting and true crime documentary and stuff. And there's maybe we're maybe hitting a bubble on that stuff, but like, it's because people have located a way to like tell an important story and tell it in a compelling way, which often just comes down to like, where do you start the story? Where do you end? Who do you decide to focus on? Those things really feed the sort of ideas behind the story and make it, I think, compelling and entertaining. I think that sometimes journalists want to pretend that's not important or something, but like, you want it to be something that grabs someone. Like at City Paper, you were like, my audience is someone on the bus who grabbed it. Like really, or at a bar. And like, I used to ride the bus all the time. So you would literally see people grab the paper and you would see them read something and stop reading and go to something else. It's like a really good, like almost like beta test where you'd be like, oh, okay, well, that at least that person didn't like that story. They read 3 paragraphs of it and turned the page to something else or whatever. Like, those things are interesting to know and understand. And you want to try to, you're not going to hook everyone, but you want to find those ways to like hook people in, make them care about it. And sometimes with style, as I said, like on a level that they don't always realize, like similar to like movies, like, you know, cutting and light cuts, editing and score, and these things that we kind of feel before we comprehend them are really important. So I try to bring some of those to journalism too.
Yeah, I like to speak in quotables, and I think I'll summarize that whole chunk right there as I like seasoning on my stories.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great way of putting it.
So marketing background. So the last thing I'll ask before I like to give the opportunity to shamelessly plug and shameless. But so I'm going to put a little bit of a spin on this. And it's not about favorites, but it's about what comes to mind. So you have folks visiting from out of town. Let's say somebody you met from out of town, they're going to visit. Hey, I want to get an idea of what Baltimore is. I want a place to eat. I want something cultural, and I want a bar to go to. What are your suggestions? One of each. Doesn't have to be your favorite, but just a suggestion that you would throw out there.
That's interesting. I mean, I think that the place I kind of try to start people at is the Crown, actually, because it's both sort of a club and therefore accessible, but also it kind of actually to some ways brings a lot of people together, and you know it's a lot of different groups and scenes going on there, and so I think it's kind of a good sort of confluence of interest. That's always a place I encourage people. I also tell people to, although I don't know the exact nature of how it's operating because of COVID, but a thing I always tell people to check out if they can is the Tubman House in West Baltimore, run by Eddie Conway, former Black Panther. It's an outdoor garden, and that's a really important place. And like, if you're in Baltimore on a Sunday, you could head over there and you know, be respectful of the fact that they're doing the work over there, but stop by and see that. I think that's a really important thing. And then the other place I always, even though it's maybe a cheat because it's kind of city county line, is for food. I always tell people to go to Chaps Pit Beef.
Okay.
Because I think, again, like if you think of it in a way, like the Crown is kind of downtown-ish. Not really, but you know what I mean. It's on North Avenue. It's around sort of, it ostensibly scans as a place that's like tourist friendly, even though it's not Harbor East or somewhere that I wouldn't encourage people to always check out because it's something that's that interesting. And then you have something like, if you want to go to Chaps, you're going to have to pretty much head out almost to the counties. You're going to see a lot of the city on the way there. Yeah. If you want to go over to Tubman House, you're going to head over to West Baltimore as well. And so it sort of gives you those 3 points, and also very different places. Just the weirdness of Chaps is fascinating, and the parking lot of a strip club, and
that was a key thing. I was wondering if you were going to mention it. I was like, well, there's some other entertainment there as well. If you like.
So like I try to. I think that like it's weird because you want to. I think that I sometimes have a little bit of a contrarian response when people come to the city because I know what they're looking for. Yeah, and so I don't want to mess with people or send them somewhere they're not going to enjoy. But I try to really push back against the kind of expected places. Like, yeah, you probably already know about Fells Point. You probably already know about the Inner Harbor. I don't need to tell you to go to the Inner Harbor or whatever. And so that would be kind of my 3 places, which you could do that in a weekend pretty easily, I think.
So thank you for that. That's great. And I find it funny that you said contrarian because that's a nickname that my girlfriend throws around. I'm the contrarian Aquarian, and it's great. So shameless plugs. We will wrap up real quick. Your social media, website, all that good stuff. Where can he check you out, and where can he buy the book? Sure.
So on Twitter and Instagram, I'm No Trivia, at No Trivia, which is a Wu-Tang Clan reference. So you can check me out on there. You can buy the book in most bookstores. I'd really encourage you to buy it from a local bookstore, or at least an independent bookstore if you're not in Baltimore. So in Baltimore, Greedy Reads, Charm City Books, Ivy Books, Red Emma's. If I don't like to tell people what to do, but don't trying to buy it from Amazon. If you have to, please, I'm not going to tell you, it's also going to be cheaper on Amazon, but I really try to encourage people to not shop at Amazon. If you go to igotamonster.com, all one word, we have a nice little website that I did my best to make look professional. And that has some information about the book. It has a book trailer. There's a pretty cool 4-minute trailer for the book that was edited together based on, really briefly, we worked on a documentary for the book at the same time. Okay. So a lot of the interviews that make up the book, like that led to the creation of the book, were filmed. And so there's a book trailer that kind of puts some of that together. And there's a documentary with the same name as the book, I Got a Monster, that should be in some film festivals. It actually was supposed to premiere last year at the Maryland Film Festival, but because of COVID, that didn't happen. So it's been resubmitted to a bunch of festivals. And then hopefully by summer or later this year, that'll be streaming somewhere, I hope. We'll see. But there's that. That's about it. Something that me and Lisa Snowden-McCrae, a reporter here, are working on is, very briefly, we started a new newspaper in Baltimore after the city paper closed. The funding for that was pulled by 4 months, but we are in the process of sort of rebuilding and reimagining that paper for the future. So keep an eye out for a Baltimore beat and ways to support independent nonprofit journalism. Yeah.
So that's great. So thank you. This has been wonderful.
Thank you. This is great.
So for Brandon Soderberg, I am Rob Lee, saying that there's art in and around Baltimore. You just got to look for it.